Okay, we'll start the second day of the symposium. So despite the nice evening that you had, most of you are here in the morning. That's great. Thank you very much. Again, thank you for joining us here. I think it was yesterday really an amazing day. It's really a very international panel here. And we really appreciate all the contribution, the different vision. And we saw really a lot of different points about empowering social changes, the relation between the artist and the scientist, also the methodology, how we organize artist residency. And we see that it's quite complex, huge diversity of practice, a lot of challenges too. So today we'll start with a controversial topic about innovation. But to introduce this morning session, we'll have Evan Ziporyn.
That's good enough.
She told me. and Leila Kine. Evan, you will give, I think, the keynote first, if I understood well. That was how Leila told me. So you're a composer, if I understood well, and minimalistic music, also working with gamelan, some really interesting instrument. You also played music a lot with Steve Reich, so going around the world, re-practicing, but you're also a faculty at MIT, the Canon Sahin Professor of Music, holding this chair, and also the faculty director of the CAST, the Center for Art, Science and Technology. So thank you for being with us. It's a great honor to have with you, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. So yes, as mentioned, I'm Evan Ziporyn, and I'm here as faculty director of the MIT Center for Art, Science and Technology. Sorry, I went too fast. So I'm here with my co-director, Leila Kinney, who's sitting over there and who'll join us for the panel discussion. She's the executive director. We founded CAST in 2012. And the topic, as you will hear and as you know, is seeding innovation. And I know we're going to have a lot of discussion about innovation over the course of the panel discussion. But actually what's interesting to me is the first word of those two words, the seeding and everything, and the entire practice of selecting the seeds, planting them, tilling them, and bringing them to harvest, which I think can be sometimes overlooked because innovation is so spectacular when it occurs. I want to tell you basically some case studies from our own work and give you a little bit of context about MIT, and maybe that will help clarify our perspective on all this. So one of the interesting things about being at MIT is that there's an ethos of innovation that surrounds everything, because you're in a place that from its very beginning dedicated itself to all sorts of innovation, mainly in sciences and engineering. And so you're surrounded by people who invented radar or are mapping the human genome, or inventing disposable razors or condensed soup, or many things like that. So convincing people that innovation is important is not really a problem. Convincing people that arts are important can sometimes be a little bit more of a challenge at a place like MIT, even though MIT has a long history with the arts, really from the beginning, when it was mainly the things you'd expect, kind of extracurricular banjo clubs and theatrical societies and things like that. But starting in the post-war era, actually MIT became a place for artistic innovation as well, through a sequence of events that really started in around 1967, when Jerzy Kepes, a Bauhaus-trained artist, started the Center for Advanced Visual Studies, which really was the first Center for Artistic Research in the U.S. It's kind of where that concept was introduced to the U.S., or one of the first places. And then over the next 20 years, there were all sorts of self-contained programs that you can see here that tried to make more of a connection between art and science, art and technology, or tried to create programs that were involved in this. And this kind of culminated maybe in 1985 with the Media Lab, technically Media Arts and Sciences, and both the center and the Media Lab. The center has changed its name, and the Media Lab is having some fairly high-profile difficulties right now, but they're both still ongoing ventures. CAST, our center, was started in 2012 and it had a little bit of a different model because what we were coming out of was at that point the realization, and I've heard this spoken of a lot by many of you in general and in terms of your own home bases, with a lot of scientists and engineers who were artistically inclined in one way or another, and a lot of artists who were very analytical, and definitely on the ground with students, which is a major concern to us at MIT, students who were coming in able to do all sorts of things. They could code, they would be writing apps, they would be playing the Liszt B minor sonata, they'd be improvising jazz, they wanted to act. And so we were also dealing with this educational situation where we're trying to help these students figure out a life where they didn't have to compartmentalize and didn't have to think of leaving some part of their being at the laboratory door and another part at the practice room door. So the other thing about CAST when we started is that unlike all of these ventures, these are our people, but we are not associated with any particular school at MIT. We're funded by 2 schools, an associate provost office, and private funding, particularly right now, and initially from the Mellon Foundation, but also from private donors. And so this, and we also are a virtual center, meaning that not only are we not housed conceptually by a school, but we're not housed by anybody anywhere. I mean, we don't have a building. We have some offices. We have an amazing staff who make all sorts of things happen, particularly on the production side. But everything else, any studios, any performance spaces, any classrooms, any maker spaces, all of these we have to, for any residencies or any other programs we do, we need to partner with existing programs. And so that's been sort of a challenge, but also an opportunity, because right from the beginning, what we realized is that if we were going to do anything of significance on the campus or in the wider community, it was going to have to be in partnership with existing programs. So we kind of built that into our ethos right from the start. And so since we started, which was 7.5 years ago, we've worked with 35 different programs within MIT, and they're all listed here, and you can see that they range from things that you'd really expect, like the very arts-oriented programs that are in the School of Architecture, to hard sciences, hard engineering, and even the Sloan School of Management, which is the business school. And the size of because of this, the size of our programs can range from things that are very long residencies that could last multi-years to very quick single-shot kind of programs that kind of come and go. The way that we do this is we offer to support 4 types of activities: artist residencies, cross-disciplinary classes for credit, faculty grants for artists and designers and architects on the faculty, and also a series of public programs which range from installations to a sound art series and a performing art series. And so in the 7.5 years since we started, we've brought in more than 90 artists. You can see all this, 230 class visits, 17 collaborative projects that were presented internationally. We have supported 40 courses, which means we've directly impacted 6,400 students, 29 grants to creative members of the MIT faculty, and 175 public programs, 67,000 attendees, 24 commissioned works, 18 world premieres. Also, 2 biennial symposiums, with our 3rd coming up in April of 21, and 2 publications that came out of that symposium. One, the book Seeing, Sounding, Sensing, which Caroline Jones edited, and the other called Being Material, which several of us edited. So what I'd like to do really is just tell you about a few of the residencies that we did, and the ways in which they worked, and the lessons that we learned from them, and how we organized them, and how we measured outcome, et cetera, et cetera. So at first, we can talk about Thomas Saraceno, who is fairly well known in Paris in particular. I know I'm not speaking to a Parisian audience, but I'm sure some of you were aware of or possibly attended the 2018 show at the Palais de Tokyo, his one-man carte blanche exhibition. And that quite wonderful exhibition featured several works that he had done done in collaboration with MIT engineers and scientists and artists, actually over the course of his residency, which began in 2012. Basically, this is a matter in the seeding category of picking an artist who you think is going to thrive in a particular ecosystem. And so because Thomas was trained as an architect and has a kind of fairly strong scientific background, basically our first act, basically day one, start cast, day two, invite Thomas Saraceno. That was really Leela's initiative, and it was a brilliant one. And we just brought him at first for an exploratory visit. We had no agenda, we had no plan. We just brought him around and started introducing him to people and seeing what conversations ensued. And then from there, what kind of projects would ensue and how we could support those, make those happen. And basically, quite a lot ensued, and his collaborations go on to this day with MIT faculty in various ways. But three of the more significant ones. First, he very quickly came to the attention of Marcus Bühler, who's a professor in civil engineering, and they shared a common interest in spiders and spider webs. So Thomas had developed this scanning technique, which you can see a little bit on the left, a bit of the one of the realizations of taking 3D tropical spider webs and scanning them with 3D with lasers. He had developed that previously in 2010 at TU Darmstadt. And he showed this technique to Marcus Bühler. Marcus Bühler was very interested. And then Thomas gave the lab a Certophora spider, a spider in resonance. And the spider, they gave the spider a little home, and the spider went to work. So that's a very unambiguous resonancy, clear outcome, get spider, spider builds web. And then the Marcus Bühler's lab kind of refined the scanning technique that Thomas had developed and did their own scanning, and then built a virtual web. And Zhao Xin, who was an advanced graduate student, began doing research on that, and also Isabelle Su. And then this was a very important part of Thomas's continuing work with the spider webs that was shown at the Palais. At the same time, Thomas's Erisine project, and this is seen at the 2015 Grand Palais, came to the interests of another department, Earth and Atmospheric Planetary Sciences, and they developed for him, and this is an attempt, as you may know, it's kind of a collective art project to develop fossil-free ways of moving about the planet in the air. And so EAPS, which is Earth and Atmospheric Planetary Sciences, kind of developed this float predictor for Thomas, and which basically allows anybody in the Erisine project to sort of figure out, it's a very idealistic sort of utopian project, which actually does have more real-world manifestations than you might think. But with the float predictor, you can go like, here I am in Paris, and I need an Erisine way to get back home to Boston because my flight's going to get shut down. And you can use the float, just theoretically. And then you can use the float predictor to tell you that it's going to take you 11. It measures the predictive atmospheric changes and tells you it'll take 11 days and 35 hours or whatever. So it's utopian, but in this case, you have a situation where with the spiders, you have coming out of just various conversations and exchanges of ideas, you had several research papers, one almost complete dissertation, and an effect on Thomas's own art. And then in the case of the Erisine, you have actually a collective work of art that's contributed to by something coming out of the residency. And then finally, with Thomas, this is the one with sound, Greg. If you wanted to have a little sound. It doesn't have to, it's just ambient sound. But this was Tomas actually, that's a little loud, maybe. And it goes on for an hour, so maybe turn it down. So Tomas asked some of us in music, we had various conversations about Spiderweb Instruments, and so we developed with using the 3D model of the web as both a visual and a and a kind of tool for sonification. We created this immersive installation performance piece called Spider's Canvas Arachnodrone, which Tomas commissioned us to do at his Palais show. So, and that's since been performed in Boston and then installed as an installation in one of the new buildings in MIT, not permanently, but it was there for about 6 months. So, there again, you have a situation where the combination of research and art and an artist sort of inspires actual new work coming not from either that artist or those researchers. So it turned out to be a very robust and kind of ongoing collaboration. They don't all work out that multifacetedly wonderfully, but this one did. So second example, this is the work of Agnieszka Courant, a Polish artist who we actually brought in because there's a thing at MIT called the Hacking Arts Festival, which we also help sponsor. And there was a group of graduate students, mainly in the School of Architecture and Design, who were looking to wanted an artist to give them input. These were people who worked in machine learning and machine intelligence, and also in kind of empathy, learning to read empathy and empathic response from the internet and various things that I frankly don't really understand. But we had the idea to bring them together with Agnieszka Courant, who's done a lot with swarm behavior. And I guess the reason I also mention this is to say that one of our ways of working, which I could go into in a lot of detail, but I won't, is that our application process is very open. That, I mean, we have everything comes from the community, and it can come from any level of the community, from faculty to lab directors to graduate students, even undergrads. Actually, anybody within the MIT community can make a proposal. Obviously, we have deadlines, but the initial proposal is very simple. It's basically just like a 2-sentence letter. I'd like to do this. And maybe people have an artist in mind. Maybe they have a very specific project in mind, or maybe they have something very vague, or maybe they have something totally impossible. And then we have an iterative process between Lila and I and our producers and the proposer to come up with something that fits within our mission and within a budget and that has viability in terms of administrative support, which is why things can range from very broad multi-year projects to something like this, where it was just, not just, but I mean, where it really came from students wanting to find somebody who could kind of pull them all together and do a project. And we were able to accommodate that. So both of her works, you can actually find out more about at the SF MoMA website, Open Space. They're both kind of featured there. This one, Animal Internet. She describes it essentially as a collective Tamagotchi. And so it involves live webcams of actual animals with these kind of responses that are organized by crowdsourcing empathy readings from the internet. That's about the best I can do with telling you about this one. But because that was such a successful project in terms of how we gauge success, which is the engagement of the stakeholders and the participants, it did happen to have a work of art that came out of it, but that's really not the measure for us. It's more just the level of collaboration, the kind of robustness of it, the kind of conversations, and what seemed to be the offshoots afterwards. We sort of put the word out that she was around, and she caught the interest of a researcher in CSAIL, which is computer science and artificial intelligence, named Boris Katz. And they together worked on this piece, Assembly Line, which is a kind of evolving 3D sculpture based on remunerated, I want to make that clear, input from Amazon Turk workers who can plug in self-portraits, which then she turns into into this sculpture. So it's a way of inverting facial recognition, of basically taking that technology. So in that sense, I suppose it's a slightly passive intervention, I suppose, and that it's taking an innovation that we're all kind of terrified of and turning it into something that has a different sort of use. And then finally, this is actually one of my favorite projects and stories, because someone like Saraceno is very internationally well known, and he's working on grand scales, and he's working with teams, and he's got a factory, and he's amazing, but he's kind of huge, and his project took several years. Paweł Romanchuk is another Polish artist. He's a sound artist, and he runs a collective called Male Instrumenti in Wrocław, and basically, we brought him in because there's this fantastic maker culture at MIT that's kind of, now is blessed with that name, but basically it was kind of circuit benders and tinkerers, and a lot of that at a place like MIT tends to happen under the radar because people are doing things like, huge, multi-year experiments or working collectively to create pictures of black holes. But there's also just a lot of people who want to take a drill and some PVC pipe and some electronics and make stuff. And Paweł does this in this incredibly creative and kind of whimsical way that's also quite profound. So essentially we invited Paweł to come and just sit in a room with about a dozen students and a bunch of piles of junk that they bought at the Home Depot and at actually from MIT recycling areas, which turned out to be very important. And they simply spent a week making instruments and then composing music for it and doing a concert. So that's all great. That was a very nice thing. The guy on the left in this picture was an undergraduate named Peter Kadar. And Peter at that time was a mechanical engineering undergrad and a kind of part-time jazz pianist. And then Peter left MIT. This was during his senior year, I think. It was 2015. He graduated, went into private industry, came back 2 years later to do a graduate degree and to keep playing in the MIT jazz band. And in that jazz band, we had sponsored a commission by a composer named Miguel Zinan, who's a Puerto Rican activist musician. And the group had gone down to Puerto Rico, and in the course of the outreach that we had sort of built into the program, the group met climate activists who were working on desalinization and just the water crisis in the wake of Hurricane Maria. And so then Peter came back and he did two things, and one of them was that he became director of the jazz band and began writing pieces on climate control themes, which is obviously really nice and has some impact, but also changed the whole nature of his research so that now what he's doing is, and it's just beginning stage research, and it's simply one graduate student, but instead of looking for ways to go into the private sector to kind of make profit-generating devices, he's now working with actually it's related to the urinatron in a certain way, in that he's using recycled materials to actually generate energy to go toward desalinization projects. And you can read about that at sustainability.mit.edu. So that's a very simple and straightforward outcome that when we talk about measuring success and whether it comes in a completed artwork, sometimes you get that in the case of a Saraceno or an Agnieszka Courant, and when it comes into some kind of measure that's going to please engineers or scientists, like published research papers, dissertations, new technologies, etc. Sometimes you get that. But for me, I think that what makes me most personally proud is just this kind of on the ground. Here is one person who was trying to put together their interest in art and technology in a meaningful way. And through these residencies, not directly, but just through the combination of them and through an atmosphere in which both are valued and both are seen as having something to do with each other, something new comes out of it. So where that goes for him or for anybody else, any of the other 6,400 students that we've been able to reach so far, that remains to be seen. But that is what we're trying to do. Thank you.
Evan, thank you very much for sharing with us. It's quite impressive. I've seen the installation of Saracen. I think that you also have this sound of the spider. I remember on the installation in Milan, you can even hear the sound of the spider.
He does several projects with that, and I was lucky enough to get involved with those. He had this thing called the Spider Jam Sessions, where he could get a bunch of... And he'd mic the spiders. Yeah,
and I know that IRCAM also worked with him in a collaboration, so it's a good network. So I will also call now my distinguished other panelists.